Hello music fans, today I'm reviewing the latest album by Opeth called The Last Will and Testament, released on November 22nd, 2024. Usually on my channel I just do quick first impression videos of albums that I listen to, but I think this one is epic enough that it deserves a full-length album review. This is a progressive death metal album with progressive rock, jazz fusion, acoustic influences all in there, and it's the 14th album by this amazing Swedish band. Opeth consists of Michael Ackerfeldt, or maybe it's Mikael Ackerfeldt. I'm just going to call him Michael throughout this, so I don't butcher the Swedish pronunciation of his name. He is the band leader who has been in the band since 1990. He's appeared on all the albums, plays guitars, lead and backing vocals, citra, mellotrons, percussion and effects. He does the string arrangements, art direction, and he wrote the lyrical concept. And the second longest standing member on this album is Martin Mendez, who has been in the band since 1997. He's been on all albums starting with Still Life. He does the bass and the backing vocals here. Then we have Fredrik Åkesson as the next longest standing. He's been in the band since 2007. He's on all albums starting with Watershed. And he plays guitars and backing vocals on here. Then there's Joachim Svalberg, who joined when the prog rock era of Opeth started, right on the album where they stopped doing death growls, Heritage. He's been on all albums starting with Heritage, and he does piano, Hammond organ, mellotrons, Fender Rhodes, and Moogs, and backing vocals and effects. And then the new member replacing Martin Axelrod on drums is Waltteri Väyrynen, who joined in 2022. And this is his first album with Opeth, and he does drums, percussion, and backing vocals. They've got some additional musicians on this album. They've got Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull fame, who plays flute on Paragraph 4, Paragraph 7, and A Story Never Told. He does spoken word stuff. He plays the narrator of the story. There's spoken word on Paragraph 2, or Paragraph 1, 2, 4, and 7. And then they have Joey Tempest, who's the lead vocalist of the rock band Europe. You know, the ones that sing the Final Countdown. You would have never expected him on an Opeth song, but he does backing vocals on Paragraph 2. Mia Westland does the harp. Miriam Ackerfeldt does spoken word on Paragraph 1. This is Michael's daughter. Then they have the London Session Orchestra on strings arranged by David Stewart. And the additional personnel who worked on the album, they have Stefan Bowman and Joe Jones and Opeth doing the engineering. Stefan Bowman, Michael Ackerfeldt, and Opeth doing the mixing. Miles Showell doing the mastering. Kit Cunningham as the drum technician. Travis Smith did the cover art. Terry Ilmainen, I don't think I pronounced that right, doing the photography. And Amanda Martinez and Independent Costume doing the clothing. And Clara Rungfist Fors doing dramatic consultation. So that's everyone involved in making the album. Before diving into the music and lyrics, let's just start with a quick commentary on the album art. It's just an old-timey, large family photo in black and white, presumably showing the family of the wealthy patriarch whose last will and testament this album is about. Now, what does the music sound like? Well, the big news here is that Michael's growls are back. In 2011, on their album Heritage, Opeth abandoned their progressive death metal sound. They stopped doing harsh growl vocals and they went to 100% clean vocals, 70s inspired prog rock. They did that for 4 albums in a row. Now on this one, they brought back the growling vocals, which made a lot of fans happy. It made me happy too, even though I like both eras, both their progressive death metal and their prog rock eras. I do prefer their kind of 1998 to 2008 sound from the album My Arms, Your Hearse to Watershed. That's my favorite run of albums from the band. This is not exactly a return to their older sound though. It just brings back the growling and death metal elements, but it also retains a lot of the elements from their newer prog rock sound. If anything, I think The Last Will and Testament signals the start of a new era for Opeth. The compositions on here are a lot more frenetic and chaotic, with sudden and surprising changes in many of the songs, and they don't have as much repetition and typical song structure that you might hear on some of their older material. That makes them very exciting to listen to, but the downside is it's harder to remember the songs, so they may be a bit less catchy and have fewer earworms that get stuck in your head like previous Opeth albums. The two singles I heard ahead of time, S1 and S3, are great singles. Paragraph 1 and Paragraph 3. Most of the song names on this album are just paragraph and then a number. There's 8 tracks on the album. It's Paragraph 1 through 7, and then Story Never Told, I think is what it's called. Yeah. So Paragraph 1 features growling vocals, but Paragraph 3 does not. So I wasn't sure coming into this album if the growls were just going to show up on Paragraph 1 or maybe just a couple songs. But there are growls on every song except for 2 of them, which is Paragraph 3 and A Story Never Told. Growls are prominently featured, but they're also used sparingly in places where it makes sense with the story and the character who's speaking, representing the voice of the father for the most part, I believe. They don't dominate the vocal delivery. There's still a lot more singing on this album than there is growling. Michael brings a lot of variety to his singing voice as well. He possibly his best vocal performance of his career so far. He does low singing, high singing. Some parts are staccato and quick, and some parts hold out notes. Some parts use intense vibrato, and some are sung in a plainer way. I think more variety than he's ever used on previous albums. The guitar riffing on the album is excellent. The riffs mostly sound evil and spooky, and they bring in some Middle Eastern scales from time to time. The guitar solos are mind-blowing. Some of them are fast and sound very difficult to play, and then others are slower, more melodic, and just beautiful. The drumming is amazing, some of the best drumming I've heard all year. It's just amazing how he can play the fast, brutal, intense parts so well, but he also plays this soft, jazzy, reserved stuff really well too. And the keyboard melodies and the sounds chosen for the keyboards are all very reminiscent of 70s prog, and they're an essential part of the sound. Then the bass holds down the fort in a nice way, but it doesn't just follow the guitar and what it plays. I like that it often plays melodic parts instead of just playing the root notes of chords like bass often does in a lot of other rock bands. A really interesting bass sound. And the inclusion of flute, harp, and orchestra just bring in more sounds and make this sound a lot more epic and significant. Now, generally, I feel like this is the best album that Opeth has done since Watershed. I generally like the concept albums, so I'm glad they did one here. I like their progressive death metal sound with death growls, even though I also like their prog rock era. I enjoyed the theatrical qualities of this release in particular. I feel like it's more theatrical. It's above and beyond anything they've done before. Compositionally and sonically, I find it really interesting too to listen to this album. Some of the best vocal, guitar, and drum performances are on here. This is going to be an album that will take most people a lot of listens to digest fully. You need a listen just to focus on vocals and lyrics, one to focus just on drums, one to focus on guitars, one on keyboards, one on bass, and so on, because there's so much going on here. It's hard to digest it all on first listen. Now let's talk about the story a bit. This is a concept album that should be heard from start to finish to truly understand how awesome it is. The story is set in the post-World War I era. It tells the story of a wealthy conservative patriarch whose last will and testament reveals shocking family secrets. And just a warning for this story, there might be a few spoilers ahead, so if you're the type of person that wants to keep aspects of the story surprised, maybe skip ahead about a minute into the video. I'm like that with some movies or books, but I don't really feel the same way about stories on concept albums. So generally, I'm okay with spoilers when it comes to music stories. But I got this story synopsis from a Reddit thread. I think that was quoting Michael himself. The story starts with 3 siblings arriving at their family mansion. Their father, who's a stern, old, conservative, paranoid, evil nobleman, he has passed away. And he's going to divide, you'd think he would divide his fortune between his 3 children. There's 2 twins. One's a man and one's a woman. They're in their late 20s. And then there's a young girl who's riddled with polio. And the lyrics of the album are like the reading of the last will and testament. and that's why the songs don't have titles, just paragraph 1, 2, so on up to 7. Now, throughout the reading of the father's last will and testament, these kids find out a lot about themselves, a lot about their father's secrets and their connection with the family. The twins are the result of donor procreation, because the patriarch and his wife tried to have children, but it didn't work out. The patriarch blamed the wife for being barren, but they wanted children so badly they tried with the donor. A guy had sex with his wife. She got pregnant with the twins. But in the meantime, the main character regrets that his wife has been violated by another man. So he basically regrets the twins and that they're not his blood. Throughout the reading of the testament, the twins find out that he actually isn't their father, and they're ultimately left out of the will. His only true child by blood is the sick girl. So she inherits everything, but she's the result of a love affair that he had with the maid of the mansion. He lied to his wife, saying that the maid had an affair and that they should take care of her poor child as if she was one of their own. But now the wife of the father has also passed away, but she knew her husband had been unfaithful and that the child was still brought up in their house. But this sick girl with polio, she's a blood heir. She inherits everything. Then the last will and testament ends, and the last song, The Story Never Told, comes in, and it has a bit of an extra twist in it. So the girl's living in the mansion that she inherited. Then a letter arrives from her mother, the maid, saying that she lied to the father and that she's actually the result of another love affair, and he was never her dad. So that's kind of the twist of the story. The patriarch really was sterile after all, and he gave away his entire fortune to a girl that wasn't his child in any way. Now, let's go quickly track by track to kind of explain the music here. Paragraph 1, it starts with the sound of footsteps and a door opening. Then it goes into a long, spooky instrumental opening before clean vocals come in with a lot of vibrato. Growls call out a line, followed by the narrator saying the same line. And probably my favorite part of the album is when he growls, "The last will and testament of father," that line over this visceral, intense, kind of simple breakdown riff just made me very happy that Opeth growls and Opeth's metal intensity were back. Then there's like a ticking clock with a lot of vintage 70s sounding keyboards behind it. This weird, surprising major chord comes in with some high guitar lead harmonies that sound like Queen. And then there's a girl doing spoken word. She just sounds really creepy. And I think that was Michael's daughter, Miriam Ackerfeld, doing those spoken word there. On paragraph 2, this song's about the girl with polio. It starts with some keys and then hits you in the face with some intense growls. That beginning kind of reminds me of Ghost of Perdition because it has that like kind of slow, quiet, soft part at the beginning right before it punches you in the face with growls right off the bat. And Ghost of Perdition is my favorite song by Opeth because of that. It's just an awesome song. So I like that this reminded me of that. Paragraph 3, this song doesn't have any growling vocals, but it's still a really heavy song. The instrumental intro with driving drums and intense guitar riffing is one of the most intense on the album. And I like the low, clean vocals Michael does here too. It's as the beginning vocals of the song. Really cool sound. Paragraph 4 has the father explaining to the twins how they're not his, but that since his wife longed for a child, they came up with a plan to have another man impregnate his wife. It has a nice harp part that kind of comes out of the blue, out of kind of thin air, and the harp starts playing randomly. And then it also has another kind of random, great bluesy flute solo played by Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull. That's pretty cool. And paragraph 5 has this nice staccato acoustic guitar at the beginning, nice lead and backing vocals. And when the growls kick in, it just becomes a really heavy song. Then it ends with a fade out. And paragraph 6 is where the father explains how he's leaving his fortune to the girl with polio rather than the twins who expected they would get the fortune. It starts with this 3-chord intro that sounds really happy and has an energetic drum beat behind it for the first minute. Then the clean vocals come in, Around the 2-minute mark of paragraph 6, the growls come in. 3-minute mark has some great keyboard solo, followed by an amazing guitar solo, awesome kind of breakdown riff. And the 5-minute mark has some awesome acoustic guitar outro with nice electric guitar, clean lead over top. Paragraph 7 is the father just leaving the twins some artifacts and heirlooms that are in a sense worthless. And it starts with a nice heavy riff played with a nice guitar tone. Lots of narration in this track in addition to clean and harsh vocals. Then the riff at the 3-minute mark, really awesome and heavy, and there's a great guitar solo at 3.5 minutes. And then the last track is the only track with a name that's not just paragraph and a number. It's A Story Never Told. It's the slower and softer song to end the album. All clean vocals on here. It sounds different from the rest of the album too in terms of composition. It's much more of a traditional song than anything else on the album. It's got a chord progression that repeats many times. Has a great guitar solo at the 5-minute mark. Now that's all the tracks. In terms of what stands out about this album, I'd say the innovation here. Opeth is always an innovative band with a very unique and recognizable sound. It is a progressive death metal album, but that doesn't sound like any other progressive death metal band sounds. It sounds uniquely like Opeth. The instruments chosen, harp, flute, orchestras, and all that, along with the rock band, make it unique to Opeth. The tones that they use, the scales and the modes they use, or sometimes the lack thereof, where they just go atonal. The flows of the compositions, the way the recording sounds like real humans playing instruments. Some parts go into this bizarre sounding major chords and sound happy. Jazzy sections exist, and there's like classic prog rock sounds. That's what makes this sound really different from a typical album in the progressive death metal genre. Most albums in the progressive death metal genre have started to sound a lot more computerized in recent years, and this one sounds more organic and more real, like a band playing. The production on the album is really well done. There's a lot of interesting atmospheric elements, sound effects, spoken word, transitions between the tracks, and an ominous, eerie feelings. It all just works very well, and you can hear every instrument and what it's doing clearly. And then the album flow and sequence is another thing that's really good here. This album flows nicely as a concept album should. It's a really good listen from start to finish. So we're coming to the end of the video here. This is where I'm going to give my overall score. Before I give my rating, let me talk quickly about the rating scale I use. I have, how many tiers do I have? 8 different tiers that I put my albums into, the top one being masterpiece. And for those, there's usually only 1 to 10 albums a year that I give that rating. Then I've got near masterpiece. Again, a rare rating, maybe 10 to 30 albums a year, we get that. Excellence, my next one after that. And then very good, below excellent. And then I've got good, and then I've got average. And then my 2 that aren't so good ratings are below average. And then my worst one would just be not good / runaway. And I'm going to give The Last Will and Testament by Opeth my top masterpiece tier rating. It's one of only 2 albums that I gave this rating to all year, so that's a bit of a spoiler for my year-end list, that this will likely feature very high on it. I'll be making a video on my year-end favorite albums shortly. So hit that subscribe button if you want to see other albums that I love from this year. I'll be making a lot of year-end content now. And hope you enjoyed this rating of Opeth's The Last Will and Testament. Let me know what you thought of the album down below. Did I get anything wrong? Did I miss any important points? Did you like this album? Did you hate this album? How do you feel it ranks amongst Opeth's, the rest of their discography? I'm not going to go as far as to say it's my favorite Opeth album. I do have an Opeth album worst to best video on my channel. Maybe if I remember, I'll put the link to that video here or here or here or here. That I made a while back with my friend Will. So check that out if you want to hear more of my thoughts on the rest of the Opeth catalog. And stay tuned for the next video. Peace out.